Nearly every building on one Texas main street still wears a historical marker. Not because a preservation society fought for them. Because the town that built them lost its reason to exist almost overnight, and nobody ever came back with the money to tear anything down. You probably pictured a city that big with a skyline, maybe a campus, at least a bypass highway. What it actually has is a guest book entry from a railroad baron, a private rail car parked across from the hotel where he wrote his curse, and a main street that looks exactly the way it did when the steamboats stopped coming. That town is number 1 on this list. You will not hear its name until we get there. Most Texas travel content is selling you somewhere, a destination, a reason to spend a weekend and feel good about where you went. That is not what Texan Roots does. We go where the clock stopped and nobody restarted it, and we tell you why it stopped, who it happened to, and what is left standing when you drive through today. That is the deal. If that is the kind of Texas you want to see, subscribe now and we will keep going. Before we count down, 3 things still coming that you should know about. One of these towns was founded by a priest on Christmas Eve, and the live oak tree where they held that first mass is still standing, in a village of roughly 45 people. One of them had a 120-year tradition that a corporation sued out of existence with a single court settlement. And one hill country town never had a church for its first nearly 40 years, never had a city government, and survived intact for exactly one reason. Nobody thought it was worth the visit. All 3 are on this list. Let's count them down. Number 10, Salado. You have probably driven through Salado doing 70 on Interstate 35 between Waco and Austin without slowing down, which is almost poetically appropriate because that is exactly what the railroads did to it 150 years ago. In the stagecoach era, Salado was a genuine stop on the Chisholm Trail, built around the Shady Villa Hotel, which opened in 1861 and still operates today as the Stagecoach Inn, one of the oldest continuously running inns in Texas. The town had a college by 1859 whose ruins still stand. It holds 19 properties on the National Register of Historic Places in a village of barely 2,000 people. For a moment, Salado was going somewhere. Then the railroads came through and laid their tracks north of town and south of town and just completely past town. The population collapsed. By 1914, around 400 people remained. By 1950, the number was closer to 200. Salado did not decline. It nearly disappeared. Picture this. You move here for the quiet, the antique storefronts, the way the afternoon light hits the creek and makes 1861 feel like it never ended. And then a tour bus parks in front of the Stagecoach Inn, and you remember that what you are living inside is now partly a stage set, maintained for the people passing through on the same interstate that the railroad ignored. The part that complicates the frozen in time label, Salado was not quietly preserved. It was rebuilt to look like it was. The town voted to reincorporate only in the year 2000. The frozen feel is now carefully curated for visitors. It stopped, nearly emptied out, and was then reassembled to look like it never changed. That is a different kind of freeze. The oldest inn in Texas is still taking guests. It is just that the guests are now the whole point. Number 9, Castroville. 26 miles west of San Antonio, on the Medina River, sits a town that is not frozen in a decade. It is frozen in a place. A specific place, 4,000 miles away, that most of the people who live here have never seen. Castroville was founded in 1844 by an impresario named Henri Castro, who brought colonists not from Germany, as in most of the hill country, but from Alsace, the contested borderland between France and Germany where both cultures collided and produced something that belonged fully to neither. They built what they knew. Around 96 steep-roofed, European cottage-style houses still stand in Castroville, some dating to the 1840s. The 1849 landmark inn is now a state historic site. The St. Louis Catholic Church anchors a streetscape that looks unmistakably like it belongs somewhere along the Rhine. And here's what made Castroville genuinely unusual, even among Texas's many immigrant settlements. It kept the Alsatian dialect alive. For generations, this was one of the only places in America where you could hear a language that most of the world had already let go. You walk through this town today, and the architecture is immaculate. The houses are real, not reconstructed, not recreated, still standing on their original footprints. And if you find the right neighbor, elderly, unhurried, willing to sit a minute, you might still hear a handful of words in a dialect that exists almost nowhere else on Earth. The catch is that you had better go soon. The buildings will outlast all of us. The living language inside them will not. Only a handful of native Alsatian speakers remain. When they are gone, Castroville will be frozen the way a photograph is, the outline of a world held perfectly in place long after the world itself has ended. A town can hold a language in its walls for a while. Not forever. Number 8, Comfort. 48 miles northwest of San Antonio, with no city government, no mayor, no city council, and for its first nearly 40 years, no church. Not one. The German Freethinkers who founded Comfort in 1854 were so thoroughly secular, so committed to philosophy and science over the pulpit, that the town stood for 4 decades before a single congregation organized inside it. Most places in Texas were built around the church. Comfort was built, deliberately, in spite of one. What they did build, more than 100 largely unaltered 19th century structures, 7 of them designed by the noted architect Alfred Giles. The 1880s streetscape survives almost entirely intact. Limestone storefronts, original facades, proportions that tell you exactly when this street was built. This is, by most accounts, one of the best preserved 19th century business districts in the entire state. And standing quietly in the center of town is one of the most unusual monuments in all of Texas, the True der Union, loyalty to the Union, raised in 1866. It honors German settlers who were massacred at the Battle of the Nueces in 1862 for refusing to fight for the Confederacy. They tried to flee toward Mexico rather than serve a cause they found indefensible. Confederate cavalry caught them. Most were killed. Their neighbors gathered the remains and raised this monument 4 years later in German, in the middle of former Confederate territory. It is one of the only pro-Union monuments erected by locals anywhere in the former Confederate states. The part nobody puts in the brochure. Comfort's 1880s streetscape survived not because anyone organized to save it, but because Comfort was too quiet and too ungoverned to attract the boutiques, the renovations, and the weekend destination money that reshaped every flashier hill country neighbor. Fredericksburg got the tourists. Bourne got the traffic. Comfort got overlooked. And the looking over is exactly what kept it original. The best preservation plan turned out to be having nothing worth visiting. Until now. Number 7, Gruene. Technically, Gruene is not a town. It was annexed into New Braunfels in 1979, and what remains is a historic district on the Guadalupe River, a cluster of original buildings along a bend in the water that the city of New Braunfels now surrounds on every side. But Gruene earns its place on this list because it did something very few places manage. It died completely, lay still for decades, and came back perfectly preserved. Gruene was built as a cotton shipping community. It peaked around 1900. Then the boll weevil hit the cotton economy, the Depression finished the job, and a dam project pulled the last economic floor out from under it. By 1930, barely 75 people remained in Gruene. By 1950, it was, without qualification, a ghost town. Buildings boarded, businesses gone, the silence of a place that had simply run out of reasons to keep going. And here is what that silence bought. Nobody tore anything down, because nobody had a reason to. No developer looked at Gruene in 1940 and saw opportunity. There was nothing to improve, nothing to rezone, nothing worth the trouble of replacing. The buildings just stood there. In the mid-1970s, a university architecture student filed a National Register nomination for the site, and a pair of preservationists bought and began restoring its centerpiece. Gruene Hall, built in 1878, now billed as the oldest continually operating dance hall in Texas. The stage that had gone dark when the town died has since held George Strait, Willie Nelson, and Lyle Lovett. The ghost town is now one of the most heavily touristed spots in the Hill Country region. What kept it frozen was decades of total abandonment. What keeps people coming is exactly that frozen quality. The crowd at Gruene Hall on a Saturday night is paying to visit the past. And the past only survived because, for a long time, nobody came. It took dying completely to become worth saving. You have seen the towns that railroads skipped and tourists quietly rediscovered. Still ahead is the town where a corporation reached in and switched off a tradition that had run for 120 years, and the one where a university got up and walked away, leaving only its stone columns standing in a field. Number 6, Dublin. Dublin is a small ranching town in Erath County, southwest of Stephenville, and for 120 years, its entire identity ran through a single brown bottle. In 1891, a man named Sam Houston Prim arrived in Dublin with $680 of equipment and opened what became the oldest soda bottling plant in Texas. More specifically, the first and oldest bottler of Dr. Pepper in the world. Dr. Pepper itself had been invented in Waco in 1885, 6 years earlier. Dublin picked up the license and ran with it. For most of the 20th century, that was a fine arrangement. But then the corporate product switched to high fructose corn syrup, and Dublin did not switch with it. Dublin kept making Dr. Pepper the original way, with pure imperial cane sugar, the way Sam Houston Prim had always made it. And that one stubborn decision turned the plant into a pilgrimage site. People drove hours. They bought cases. They shipped them home. They came back. Dr. Pepper, Texas, is what the sign said. And for a certain kind of drinker, it was the only version that counted. Picture this. You live in Dublin. Your family has lived in Dublin. And this plant is the reason anyone outside of Erath County has ever heard of your town. One bottle. One recipe. 120 years of continuity and strangers driving in from Dallas and Houston because what you make here cannot be found anywhere else. And then in 2011, Dr. Pepper Snapple Group filed a lawsuit. The Dublin bottler had been selling outside its licensed territory. The 2012 settlement was final. Dublin would stop making Dr. Pepper, surrender the license, remove the name from its signs. What had been the Dublin Dr. Pepper plant became, on a specific day in 2012, Dublin Bottling Works. The building is still there. The equipment still runs. Bottles still come off the line. They are just not the bottles anyone drove hours to buy. The town is frozen, not by a railroad decision or a flood or a slow economic erosion. It is frozen at the exact moment a court settlement reached in and switched off the one thing that made it Dublin. It is still a bottling works. It is just no longer the one that mattered. Number 5, independence. Most Texans have never heard of independence, which is a strange oversight, because before Waco existed as anyone knows it today, Independence was the address that mattered. Settled in 1835, Independence was described in the 1840s as among the wealthiest communities in the Republic. Baylor University was founded here in 1845, not in Waco, here. Sam Houston was baptized in Independence in 1854. His wife's family lived in this town. For a stretch of years, this unincorporated community northeast of Brenham was one of the most important religious and educational addresses in all of Texas. Then it made two decisions, or had two decisions made for it, and they erased it. In 1885 and 1886, Baylor left. The men's college went to Waco. The women's college went to Belton. And the railroad, when it came through the region, looked at Independence and passed it by entirely. In a span of a few years, the town lost its university and its rail connection, which meant it lost its commerce, its students, and its reason to grow. Independence stopped, right there in the 1880s, with fewer than a couple hundred people in the vicinity, and it has barely stirred since. The most quietly heartbreaking sight on this entire list is what is left of Baylor's original home. In a field at Old Baylor Park, 4 stone columns still stand. They are the front face of what was once the university's women's college building. No walls behind them. No roof above them. Just 4 columns framing open sky and open grass in a county most Texans cannot locate on a map. Translation: Waco got the university, and Independence got the field. The columns are a monument, not to a war, not to a fire, not to any disaster. They are a monument to an institution the town built that then walked away and became famous somewhere else. Some towns are frozen by what left them, not by what stayed. 3 towns remain, and the one coming next has 70 acres of intact Victorian architecture that survived for one reason, and one reason only. The town was simply too poor to tear any of it down. Number 4, Calvert. Calvert sits in Robertson County, halfway between Waco and Bryan, a town of under 1,000 people today that was once one of the larger cities in Texas, and it wears that history on its main street in a way that will stop you cold the first time you drive through. At its peak around 1900, Calvert held over 3,000 people and ran on cotton. It claimed, for a time, the largest cotton gin in the world. The wealth that produced showed up in its architecture. Queen Anne, storefronts, Beaux Arts facades, prairie-style commercial buildings, all lined up along a main street that the prosperity of the late 1800s paid for and the disasters of the early 1900s accidentally preserved. The Calvert Historic District covers roughly 70 acres and 82 contributing buildings, one of the largest concentrations of intact Victorian commercial architecture in the state. What stopped Calvert was a sequence of catastrophes. A yellow fever epidemic in 1873 killed an estimated 300 to 400 people. Fires took their share. Then the boll weevil arrived and broke the cotton economy for good. The town never rebuilt, never recovered, never attracted the next industry that would have given someone a reason to tear the old buildings down and start fresh. You walk this main street today, and it looks, without exaggeration, like the 1890s never ended. Because for Calvert, economically, they didn't. The buildings are not restored. They are not recreated. They are simply still there because no one ever had the money or the motive to replace them with something newer. The most honest preservation plan is one nobody chose. Number 3, Panna Maria. Drive through South Texas oil and gas country long enough and the landscape starts to blur. Pump jacks, mesquite, caliche roads, the occasional grain elevator. And then, in Carnes County southeast of San Antonio, you find something that has no business being here. A Gothic revival stone church, a school-turned-museum, and a live oak tree that was already decades old when the Civil War started. Panna Maria is the oldest permanent Polish settlement in the United States, a title that sounds like the kind of thing a Chamber of Commerce invents, and a fact that is simply verifiably true. On Christmas Eve of 1854, around 150 Silesian families led by a priest named Father Leopold Moxigemba gathered under that live oak tree and celebrated their first Mass on Texas soil. They had crossed an ocean to get here. The tree they gathered under is still standing. They built the Church of the Immaculate Conception, first consecrated in 1856. Lightning destroyed the original. The community raised the present stone church in 1877. They opened what became the oldest Polish school in America. And then, largely, the world moved around them without moving through them. Panna Maria never grew into anything larger. The population today is roughly 45 people. The oil and gas industry has boomed through the surrounding region for decades. The energy economy filled nearby towns, drew workers, built infrastructure, changed the landscape for miles in every direction. Panna Maria held its tree and its church and its school museum and its 45 people, and the boom went around it like water around a stone. After 170 years, the living community has nearly vanished. What remains is the church, the museum, diaspora reunions, and a tree that was already old when Texas was a republic. Most Texans have driven within an hour of this village and never known it existed. The oldest Polish settlement in America is 45 people and a tree. Number 2, Archer City. 25 miles south of Wichita Falls, in the flat ranching country of Archer County, sits a town of about 1,600 people that a novelist turned into the most recognizable frozen town in Texas, without most people ever realizing the town was real. Archer City is where Larry McMurtry was born, and it is the model for the dying West Texas town at the center of his 1966 novel, The Last Picture Show. The 1971 film adaptation was shot right here, on these streets, around this courthouse square. And the Royal Theater, the movie house at the center of that story, actually had burned down in 1965 and sat dark for 35 years before the town restored it. The fiction and the reality tangled together so completely that it became hard to say which was following which. For decades, McMurtry did something genuinely improbable here. He built Booked Up, a rare book operation that filled 4 downtown buildings with something like 400,000 volumes, and drew literary pilgrims to a town in the middle of nowhere that the economy had largely left behind. Readers drove out from Dallas, from Fort Worth, from places that made more immediate sense, to spend an afternoon in a bookstore the size of a city block in a town that had no other particular reason to draw them. In 2012, most of that collection was auctioned off in a sale McMurtry himself called The Last Book Sale. McMurtry died in 2021. The courthouse square looks exactly as it did in the film. That is both the point and the problem. You live here now, in a town that a novelist made famous for being a place where nothing ever changes. And then the bookstore closed, and the novelist died, and nothing changed. Archer City is frozen twice over. Once as the original for a story about dying towns, and again around the absence of the writer who made its stillness matter. The last picture show is long over. The great bookstore is gone. What remains is a town that a work of fiction described, and that has since, very quietly, fulfilled every word of that description. A town famous for being stuck has now run out of the one reason people came to see it. Number 1, Jefferson. To understand Jefferson, you need one number, the 6th largest city in Texas. That is what Jefferson was in the early 1870s. Not a river town, not a regional hub. The 6th largest city in the state, and its single greatest inland port, where riverboats came up, Big Cypress Bayou from the Mississippi system, and as many as 7,000 people packed a booming city of hotels, warehouses, and iron-front commercial buildings in the piney woods of northeast Texas. Today, Jefferson is a quiet town of under 1,900 people near Caddo Lake, and nearly every building on its main street wears a state historical marker. Not because a preservation society organized, not because a trust raised money, because what happened to Jefferson happened so fast and so completely that the town never had the economic recovery that would have given anyone a reason to tear things down. In 1873, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers cleared the Great Raft, a massive natural logjam on the Red River that, for decades, had backed up water levels across a wide region of East Texas and made Big Cypress Bayou navigable all the way to Jefferson. Once the jam was cleared, water levels dropped. The steamboats could no longer reach the port. Then the Texas and Pacific Railway, laying its line through the region, chose Marshall instead of Jefferson, and the last economic argument for the city evaporated. Within a few years, Jefferson went from the 6th largest city in Texas to a place with nowhere to grow and no reason to rebuild. There is a legend about railroad magnate Jay Gould, reportedly snubbed by Jefferson's civic leaders during negotiations. The story goes that he wrote in the guest register of the Excelsior House, still operating today as a hotel, that grass would grow in Jefferson's streets. His private rail car now sits on display directly across from that hotel. Whether the story is exactly true is a question for historians. What is not a question, the Excelsior House has the register. They show it to visitors. Jefferson took its own downfall and turned it into the reason to come, which is either the cleverest thing a town can do or simply what happens when the only story you have left is the one about how the story ended. You walk this main street and the buildings are real, not restored to period, not rebuilt to look historic. Just the actual structures that went up during the boom and never came down because the boom left too fast for the replacement cycle to start. A city that was once bigger than most of the state was frozen almost overnight by an engineering decision made 150 miles away. Jay Gould wrote that grass would grow in its streets. He was wrong about that. About everything else, he was exactly right. 10 towns, 1 state, and not a single one of them planned to be preserved. What every place on this list shares is that nobody chose to freeze it. A railroad skipped it. A water level dropped. A corporation filed a lawsuit. A university packed its books and moved to a bigger city. A cotton economy collapsed and never came back. The clock stopped because something external changed. And what these towns have in common is that nobody ever showed up with the money or the reason to restart it. Time did not forget them. Time just ran out of reasons to change them. And the buildings were still standing when the reasons ran out. We want to know, have you been to any of these towns? Or is there a frozen Texas town we missed that belongs on this list? Tell us in the comments. And if these are the towns time stopped, the next list is the ones Texas actively abandoned. Not frozen, but fallen. Ghost towns that did not pause. They collapsed. That list is coming, and if you are watching this one, you are going to want to see it. Subscribe, and we will make sure you do.